Welcome to another deep dive. All right, today we've got some really interesting stuff to dig into. We're talking UK politics,
Yeah,
a little bit of Elon Musk,
right?
and some pretty surprising poll numbers.
Yeah.
It seems like British politics are kind of at a turning point.
It's
So we're trying to figure out what's going on.
a fascinating time to be looking at UK politics. I think there's a real sense of change happening. And what we're going to do is we're going to unpack those trends,
Yeah.
look at the data,
Okay.
and try to make sense of it all.
Well, the first thing that really jumps out to me
Yeah.
is how much trouble the Labour Party seems to be in. Like, we've got this YouGov poll here that you sent over from the Times,
Right.
and the numbers don't look good for the current prime minister at all.
No, it's true. This poll really shows
Yeah.
that there's a growing lack of trust in Labour leadership. A lot of voters are using words like incompetent, dishonest, even unsuccessful.
Wow. Those are some pretty harsh words,
Yeah.
especially, Labour won a majority government just 6 months ago.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
It's a
Like,
prey.
it's not just talk, is it? This dissatisfaction with Labour is actually showing up
Yeah.
in election results. We've got the data showing that Labour has lost 33 council seats in local elections since that big win.
And to understand why that's significant, you have to understand that council elections are kind of like a testing ground for the national mood in the UK. It can be a really strong indicator of how people might vote in a general election. So the fact that Labour is losing ground in these local races, it's a big red flag for them.
So Labour's losing seats. The Conservatives have picked up 24,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But even more interesting, I think, is this newer party, Reform UK. They've gained 7 seats.
Yeah.
They seem to be the real winners here.
Reform UK is definitely a party to watch. They're really tapping into this frustration and disillusionment that people are feeling towards both the main parties, Labour and Conservative. Their message of change is really resonating with voters who feel like the system just isn't working for them anymore.
And then we got Elon Musk, who,
Yeah.
he's never one to shy away from a little controversy. He's weighing in on all of this. He's actually calling for a new general election in the UK. Based on these polls, he even tweeted, "Vote reform. It's the only hope."
Wow.
It's kind of surreal to see someone like Musk, a tech billionaire, commenting on British politics.
Yeah.
What do you make of this?
I think it really just highlights how interconnected the world has become these days, especially with social media. I mean, whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny that his words have weight. And his call for a new election has definitely gotten people talking. It makes you wonder if tech figures are the new political influencers.
That's a good question. But let's get back to Reform UK for a second. You mentioned that they're a party to watch, and this More in Common poll really drives that point home. It suggests that if an election were held today, Reform UK could become the 3rd largest party in Parliament, taking 72 seats. That would mean Labour would lose a staggering 200 seats? Is that even possible?
It sounds dramatic, but it is within the realm of possibility, to put into perspective. Imagine a football team losing their star players. That's essentially what losing 200 seats would be like for Labour. It would drastically reduce their power, and it would make it so much harder for them to get anything done in Parliament.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the numbers. This poll predicts that some very high-profile Labour figures,
Right.
people like Angela Rayner,
Yeah.
Ed Miliband, Yvette Cooper, they could all lose their seats
Yeah.
to Reform UK.
Yeah, and it's not just happening in one particular area. This poll shows Reform UK winning seats for the first time in Wales and making huge gains in areas like, South Yorkshire, North Nottinghamshire, Greater Manchester, Tyne, where on top of that, they would come in second place in over 200 constituencies.
Which really shows how broad
Yeah.
their appeal is.
So it sounds like Reform UK is riding this wave of dissatisfaction with the way things are.
Yeah.
So what exactly is driving their popularity, and what does their potential rise really say about the state of UK politics? That's where it gets really interesting. We can't just look at the numbers.
Okay, so let's dive into that why then. What is it about Reform UK that is attracting these voters? Is it just a protest vote against Labour, or is there something more to it?
I think it's more nuanced than just a protest vote. Reform UK is led by Nigel Farage, and I think they're tapping into a much deeper sentiment here. Think of it like this. You've got a group of people who feel like the world is changing too fast, like they're being left behind. They see traditional values and ways of life fading away, and they're looking for someone to speak to those anxieties. And that's where Reform UK comes in.
So they're offering like a sense of stability and familiarity.
See, in a world that feels increasingly uncertain, they're promising to control immigration, take a tougher stance on issues like crime, social change, really put the needs of what they call ordinary people first. It's a message that resonates with those who feel overlooked or ignored by the current political establishment.
Makes sense. Yeah. And their success in those local council elections we talked about earlier.
Right.
I mean, it suggests that this isn't just a fringe movement anymore. They're actually gaining some real traction.
Yeah, and this is a trend that we're seeing not just in the UK, but in other parts of the world as well. There's this growing disillusionment with the status quo, and people are turning to these alternative parties and leaders who promise something different.
Right. And that kind of brings us back to Elon Musk's tweet calling for a new election. You said earlier his words have weight. Do you think he's actually influencing this shift in UK politics?
It's hard to say for sure. Social media is a powerful force. Someone with Musk's following can definitely shape the conversation. His tweet could be galvanizing those who already support Reform UK, but it could also be alienating others. It's like throwing a stone into a pond. The ripples spread out in unpredictable ways.
So we've got Labour struggling, Reform UK surging, Elon Musk adding fuel to the fire on Twitter. It's a lot for the average person in the UK to process. What does all this political upheaval potentially mean for their daily lives?
I think that's the question we should all be asking. If Reform UK were to gain significant power, it could have some very tangible effects on people's lives. Their policies on immigration, for example, could impact families, businesses, the overall cultural landscape. Their stance on trade and the economy could affect jobs, the cost of living.
So the stakes are high, and it's important for people to be informed and engage.
Yeah.
But with so much information and misinformation
swirling around, especially on social media, how can the average person make sense of it all? How can they form their own informed opinions? It's definitely challenging. We're just bombarded with information from all sides. And it's easy to get caught up in all the noise. That's why it's so crucial to develop critical thinking skills.
What does that look like in practice?
I think it's about questioning everything. Don't just accept things at face value, especially online. Look for evidence. Consider different perspectives. And be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
It's good advice for navigating any complex issue, really.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Labour's facing an uphill battle. Reform UK is gaining momentum. Elon Musk is adding his own unique brand of commentary to the mix.
And let's not forget, we've only just scratched the surface. There's a lot more to unpack here.
You're right. I mean, for example, we haven't even touched upon the specific policy proposals from Reform UK and what their potential impact could be, or the economic factors that are driving their popularity. It feels like we could do a whole deep dive.
Absolutely. Just on that. And then there are the long-term implications for the British political system as a whole to consider. I mean, will this trend of fragmentation continue? Or will we see a realignment of political forces? These are questions that deserve much deeper consideration.
And how might all of this play out on the global stage? I mean, the UK is often seen as a trendsetter for other Western democracies. So could this rise of populism and political fragmentation be a sign of things to come elsewhere?
Yeah,
it is fascinating, but also a little bit unsettling to think about how all these seemingly separate things, UK politics, Elon Musk on Twitter, the anxieties of everyday people, how they're all kind of intertwined.
Yeah, it really highlights how interconnected our world is and how events in one place can ripple outwards and have these global consequences.
It's like a butterfly effect, but on a political scale.
Exactly.
Which makes it even more important to understand these trends and their potential consequences, not just for the UK, but for the whole world.
Absolutely. And while we can't predict the future, we can at least equip ourselves with the knowledge and the critical thinking skills to navigate these complex times.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. We've explored the challenges facing labor, the rise of Reform UK, the role of social media shaping all this, and the potential implications for the UK and beyond. It's a lot to digest, but hopefully our listeners now have a better understanding of all the forces at play, feel empowered to form their own conclusions.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. It's not about telling people what to think, but giving them the tools to think for themselves.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, this deep dive will spark some interesting conversation.
Yeah, I hope so.
And encourage people to really engage with these issues
in
a more informed and thoughtful way.
Yeah, after all, The future of the UK, and perhaps even the world, depends on it.
Well said.
Yeah.
Until next time, happy deep diving.